friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM channel 130. Of course, our radio show is also a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org or directly to wherever you listen to your podcast.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Betsy Fentress, and I'm so glad to have with me a wonderful professor and Catholic thought leader, Dr. Janice Chi Breidenbach. She serves as director of the Philosophy Graduate Program at Ave Maria University and is also an associate professor of philosophy there. And I might add, she is also classically trained in violin, piano, and voice. As part of the Pursuit of Wisdom series of courses at Ave Maria, she teaches, and it's online and available to anyone for free, a really profound course on the philosophy of motherhood, which is what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for joining me, Janice.
Thanks so much for having me, Betsy. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and to be especially with you, actually.
Yes, we did get to meet briefly, and I did get to hear you play the piano, so that was a real joy. Now, about this course, The Philosophy of Motherhood, what inspired you to do these little mini videos that were posted online? And again, anyone can sign up for these and talk about the origins of your interest in philosophy and how it relates to motherhood, which you say is kind of an uncharted waters.
Thanks, Betsy, for the question. Yeah, I mean, I guess it goes all the way back to my education and upbringing. I was educated at I would say like secular institutions and background, I mean, sort of environments like Princeton, or University of Texas, Austin, and St. Andrews. And actually, the first institution I attended was the McPhail School for Music in Minneapolis. And these are all, I mean, I guess, the arc of a child, like, going towards like the Ivy League, right, which is like kind of what you are instilled with this ideal, from childhood. You're aiming for that,
Right.
It's really hyper professionalized from a very young age.
As a mother of six, I know it's
right.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to resist that temptation in our day and age where it is very competitive. It's very competitive to get into college. It's competitive to get a job. It's competitive to succeed and flourish, in that job. And, I mean, I think like coming from that kind of environment, the persistent and prevailing kind of mantra was go as far as you can as a professional and don't worry about family. Don't worry about having children. And if anything, there, as we know, like there's a very negative subthesis to that, which is that, you better watch out about getting married too early and not being careful,
Right. Otherwise you're going to have one of those pesky little babies that come along.
I mean, very pesky, very inconvenient to a career, and definitely is going to slow you down, if not completely obstruct you, towards your path of that kind of hyper professionalization. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of I mean, I think for a lot of young people, that's our environment, unless you're lucky enough, I think, to grow up in a really solid, loving Christian Catholic home and family and environment and educational milieu, that supports
Right.
a wholesome vocation. Yeah.
And you came into the church at Princeton
That's right. Yeah.
Through musical friends, right?
Through musical friends. So I had friends in the orchestra who, during one of these trips to Europe that the orchestra would take, they got to know me. It was through, really like friendly conversation over meals in Prague and Vienna and Portugal, about like the deepest things, and I just think there's such a wonderful way in which young people have this apostolate, right? That they can be open with one another. And my friends were open with me. They were open with me and they kind of challenged me. And they said, like, why haven't you thought about this? Why haven't you thought about Catholicism? And I just thought that is such a bold question, and I am not offended. I mean, someone might be offended by that. But
Right, right. Well, that's why we name our show Conversations with Consequences, exactly what you said, and the role hospitality plays. I know that you and your husband like to taste wine, and I we need to create these environments where these conversations are not considered, dangerous, but
yeah.
like you said, in the spirit of friendship.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's something about, I must say, music loving friends who, if you've played chamber music together with someone, you've shared something with them that is very deep within you, that is, you could say not propositional. And you might actually be in a really good place to share something further. And I've always been drawn to that particular apostolate or method, a kind of culture of evangelization that's possible through the arts.
Yes.
Uh, so
And
yeah,
so
it was.
you're trying.
Hmm.
I was just going to say, so with motherhood, that's not a very academic subject, as you said, but you're trying to up the game a little bit in this series and give it the gravitas that it deserves. And who are the thinkers that you bring into this and try to do an overlay of why some of these virtues apply to motherhood and how it's been ignored and you want to put it in the central lane again, or not for the first time?
Yeah, I think one of the most kind of obnoxious questions I ever got about this was, and you just asked a very nice question, but I was once challenged, kind of, how do you have time? As a working professional, as a professional philosopher to do this. And my response to that would be, how can you not do it? I mean, it's just such a fundamental kind of fundamental importance, this topic, to all of us. And in some sense, I mean, you're asking me like, well, who's working on this? Well, I actually see it everywhere, and my training first and foremost was in ancient philosophy.
Right,
In
that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
Are you applying Plato and Aristotle to
I
this, for
am. Yeah,
example?
I mean, I think Aristotle and Plato say both have things to say about the family. They're not always going in the right direction with it. But Aristotle's whole treatise on friendship, which I think is very familiar to many of us, and the ways in which it I think reflects a philosophy of hospitality, is really important.
Yes.
And yeah, and I think in many ways he's going against, Plato's vision of having children in a kind of eugenics, in a kind of eugenicist spirit.
Hmm.
And of course, like Plato thinks it's really important how we bring children up, but it's almost as if, all of that is for the sake of the good of the state. Right. And in the actual parenting, having a, being in a family, like is just not as important to him. And Aristotle kind of recognizes this is a big mistake, right? Like, I mean, Aristotle says nothing matters more than the life of the family. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, right? But like the whole of his treatise on virtue, I mean, at moments,
Yes.
nothing matters more than this period of childhood in which, children are absorbing from their parents, everything that they need to prepare them for actually living a life of reflection and philosophical consideration of what it is that they value together.
Right. And
And
and your series, you break it up into three parts: control, commodification, and careerism. And I want to not go really heavily into that because you say it so eloquently in these videos, but the object about control and how once you become pregnant, you are really not your own. Is this something that you're trying to formulate for a book, and how that relates to some of the feminist takes that a baby is a parasite? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
right. Yeah, I guess I should say my kind of day job as a philosopher, when I'm not working on the philosophy of motherhood, I work on an area of metaphysics called philosophy of action. And I'm really interested in the way in which our being animals overlaps with our being the kinds of rational agents that can make deliberate choices and can do philosophy, and yet all of that kind of takes place within this context of being animals, of our animality. So I
Right.
would say that's kind of the entry point into my thoughts about motherhood and the passivity or I mean, a better word might be receptivity of motherhood as opposed to the extremely hyper, active, or, ultra, it's kind of like, oriented to productivity. I mean, the kind of the models that Silicon Valley like to put out about being 10 times as fast as anyone else, this kind of thing. Natural maternity is fascinating because it brings us back to this place of reminding us of our animality, but in such a way that is transcending too that animal nature. And
Yeah,
I
you
think,
say because
yeah,
all this stuff is going on and you're not really an agent at that point. Once conception happens, I mean, besides, like you
right.
say, eating and sleeping, you're not actively involved in this process of the growth of the child within you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the ancient philosophers would call it vegetative. And I have a funny anecdote about that. I've probably told this elsewhere, but I was once with some male colleagues, including my husband, who's a historian at Ave Maria University. And I was, kind of making a joking observation that like women will never truly be equal to men in terms of like the work of the home, right? Because, when you look at the work of pregnancy, this is not a kind of work that can be divided equally between the couples, right? I mean,
It's
one,
asymmetrical.
it's asymmetrical. And, what was so funny was that one of my male colleagues immediately said, well, if we, took on half of that work, right, of gestation, we could do it in 2 months flat. Like we wouldn't need 4.5 months. Like, I mean, it
That's
was
crazy.
really hilarious, right?
Yeah. It reminds me, I had a sister who said that one of the things she loved about being pregnant was even when she was napping, she was doing something.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You
That's
know, it's
amazing, right?
it
It's
it
amazing.
really is.
Yeah.
It's such a miracle. It's so mysterious. And I did want to ask you for people who do not conceive naturally, we have a lot of interest in adoption on this show. And how do you frame the motherhood piece for them? Because some of the things you and I are just talking about, it's because we have carried a child ourselves.
Mm.
How does that philosophy of motherhood speak to those women who are adoptive mothers?
It's such a great question and such an important question for us in this day and age. I mean, just beginning theologically, we can recognize that we're all adopted. I mean, the language of adoption is in scripture. And so in an interesting way, if, I mean, one day when I do write a book about all of this, there's a sense in which adoption is a kind of voluntary and willful action towards a child as, a subject to be loved that actually serves, I think, as a really valuable paradigm for, us biological parents as well. Because there's some sense in which, definitely children can take us by surprise. I only have one, but, I can say right away that, my son is, he's different from me in personality in ways that I did not expect. We don't. I mean, I think, yeah, I don't want to say we don't always get along. I mean, he's only 6 years old, but I mean, there's definitely ways in which like we have to want to be friends with our children. We have to work on that. Uh,
Yes.
and our children are not, we can't take for granted this idea that we know them intimately just because, they were in our wombs, for 9 months and we've known them since they were, here in the world, from day one. We have to learn about this other person too. And I think there's some sense in which what adoptive parents do is so heroic, and it's so
It
supernatural.
really is.
Ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I think like really helps. It can really help to remind us biological parents the work that we have to do too, right? And like not to kind of just take for granted, the relationships that we have with our children.
Yeah, I liked how you talk about the deliberateness of them saying, I'm going to go through this process and bring this child into our lives. What you're saying is we have to do that too, even
Right.
though it's not, the child is coming from outside of our family, but within us. I think that's a really, really important point.
Mm.
Now, still in the context a little bit, you've talked about the Johns Hopkins fetal research. Can you give us a little insight into that and some of that symbiotic relationships of mother and child in the womb that we might not really be aware of?
Right. Is this the research about like sort of the interflow, the exchange of
Yes,
okay. Yeah, I mean, the way in which, I mean, we know, for instance, that biological material is transferred from mother to child, and there are all sorts of ways in which the communication there is not, it's not rational, it's not propositional, and yet, the baby in the womb somehow already knows the mother.
right.
This is really, it's a very difficult point to remember when we think about surrogacy, for instance, because, people who claim that the surrogate mother is not the mother will try explaining that to the child, who only knows the woman whose womb has been its home, for 9 months, as like so intimately and such a kind of, you could say like it's biological, but I mean, we are biological, right? I mean,
We
we
are, yeah,
yeah, and the babies know the scent. They know they have the smell kind of marked out. They can tell the differences uh between breast milk. They can identify like which one is their mother's.
that's
But
amazing.
yeah, I mean there is a lot of incredible research being done here in the area of like the science of the embryo and the fetus in the womb and the way in which like the voices of the parents too, are known to the child. Uh, and it's all very beautiful, and it's all ignored, whenever someone says, "Well, I don't care to know that," right? I mean, the rejection of the child in the womb is something that, yeah, I mean, people think they can take upon themselves, but yeah, the research is out there. I mean, it's all,
Right.
yeah.
Let me ask you this. How do you weave the Blessed Mother into this philosophy of motherhood that you're developing?
She is absolutely the beginning and the end of, I think, all of our reflections on motherhood as Catholic women. But I mean, in my own life as a convert, I recognized as soon as I learned, what Catholic theology has to offer us about the Blessed Mother, I realized, she has been here all along in my life, and I have not recognized her. I have not seen her
That's
there.
really a beautiful way of putting that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in the sense too that, all of us need, such a mother, and Jesus gives her to all of us.
Hmm.
And, one day, this was when I was at Princeton, a senior, I just realized, who has kept her from me, right? Like why, why would certain Christian denominations, de-emphasize her role to the extent that, I mean, the body of Christian faithful would kind of, distance ourselves from such a mother, right? I mean, there was something very sad about the realization that through history the mother that we all need, has been kept far from us in such a way. But yeah,
Well, and also you just realize one of the beauties of our faith is that we've honored and revered this woman from day one, where a lot of people who are wrestling with the way women are thought about or treated, and here we've had her from day one.
yeah,
Another person that I think is featured in some of your research or your writings is Edith Stein, Saint Teresa Benedicta, and what she had to say about women in the role of, she was an intellectual, she was a phenomenologist, but she also really understood the dignity of housework. What do you say about her?
yeah. I mean, Saint Edith Stein is, I mean, she has this whole book, this volume, essays on women that I think are very rich. They're not uncontroversial. You're right that she says a lot about housework. Um, she also says, by the way, that it is there are certain occupations that are particularly well suited for for the feminine
Hmm.
kind of intelligence, and they're not nursing and primary, primary school teachers. I mean, she says we need women OBGYNs in particular. We need women medical doctors, working in that field. And we also need women educators at the university level. And so, I think Stein recognized that, yes, women are, distinct from men, of course. I mean, she really emphasizes these differences, and we have our kind of own set of virtues and even vices, that correspond accordingly.
Right.
Um, yeah, but I mean, with respect to the Blessed Mother too, by the way, she said something really startling, which I think it's probably true. And she says there's been a kind of transformation of the original human relationship from that of man and woman, right? The original relationship of Adam and Eve to that of mother and son. And we see a kind of new, in her words, human couple, a new human couple in the relationship between Mary and Jesus.
That's fascinating.
And that's I mean, there's a kind of purity of that relationship that takes over in her view.
Right.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot to plumb there. It's really, really interesting what she has to say about the feminine kind of relationship here with regards to work as well.
I'm glad that you said that about women in roles in universities because I and all my co hostesses for this show went to the University of Notre Dame for a conference called True Genius. And it was reflections on Evangelium Vitae and John Paul II's letter to women, and just a general discussion about women in the church. And what really struck me was that several of the speakers were university professors, is how many of them said, I have women come into my office every week, or they are looking for a way to use their education, but be married like you're doing, be a mother, and they're looking for role models. And I think especially in secular schools, that's hard to find.
It's very hard to find. Yeah, yeah.
Do you have female students come in and talk to you about all this?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of female students about this question, and I mean, I talked to a lot of male students too, who are,
Yeah, you know what? I shouldn't have
yeah, yeah, no, I mean, it's true,
cricated
but
it.
I mean, but from the perspective too of male students searching for a vocation, in the modern world, right? I mean, it's very, very hard nowadays to expect that one will be, in a kind of situation in which a single income, can support the whole family, right?
Right.
And I think the men are wondering too, like, what does this mean for their, their masculinity, maybe? What does it mean for family life? But yeah, certainly the women, I mean, I've given lots and lots of talks, on this question, can women have it all? Usually it's like the popular title of a talk like this.
And
Uh,
your reply and your answer is?
well, I mean, it's Anne Marie Slaughter, the dean at Woodrow of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton. She was so I was in that school when I was at
Oh,
Princeton.
yeah, she's
And
great.
she has that famous essay, like why women
Yes.
still can't have it all. I mean, I think in many ways we need to recognize the question as like a badly formed question, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, and I think a lot of people have pointed out that it's kind of striking that the men, generally speaking, are not asking this question.
Right.
But I think like the younger generations are starting to see that they have to ask that question. I'm married to someone who helps a lot in the home. I'm very grateful to my husband. I wouldn't be able to do what I do if I wasn't married to someone who was so domestically cooperative and collaborative.
It makes a
And
big difference. It
yeah, and
really
because
does.
he loves it too. It's not I hope I'm not, it's not because I'm harnessing him,
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the men because I think it is important that you're having these conversations, not just with the, female students, but with the male students. We have just a
yeah.
little bit of time left. And I do have a curious question. You had a list of talks on your website. So you gave a talk at the Fashion Institute of Technology on the philosophy of fashion. What kind of things were you saying in that talk?
Well, yeah, I think that was 10 years ago. And since then, I've continued thinking about the topic. Really, I think that the charge for me with that talk was to try to convince some of the people working in this industry that beauty, is a value that should matter to us. And yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we moderns sometimes don't think about when we get dressed, is like how, can I make myself look beautiful, or does my beauty matter? I mean, certainly it seems like a very anti-feminist, approach to getting dressed.
Right.
Uh, and yet, I think it is something that resonates with, our particular community, like in Catholic circles and and even, intellectual circles here, right? Where, I mean, it seems important to us that we want to be attractive to people, in a way that retains professionalism. And, a talk I recently gave to the institute here at Ave Maria University, to the young women, who were wondering, how do we dress professionally, right? How do we convey the values of professionalism, intelligence, and competence while still being women, while still seeming feminine? And so I think there are really complicated and unique questions that come out of that the men just do not have to worry about. I mean, the men,
I agree. Yeah. I
yeah.
think it's terrific you're having these conversations with.
It's fun. It's a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
I think it's really great. I am so pleased that you are working on this. I think it's really important. I hope you'll do a book on it. I think we really need a philosophy of motherhood. It's
Too.
just
I do too.
so thank you for coming on the show. I want to direct people to your website, Janice Chi, but you say there's a K on it, but you don't say it. So it's Janice Chi, JANICECHIK.com.
That's right. Thank you so much, Betsy. Yeah.
And to learn more about us, visit thecatholicassociation.org to follow everything we do in radio, TV, print, online, in our local communities. Janice, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Betsy. Thanks for all you do.
Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I am your host, Mary Fiorito.
And I'm Ashley McGuire.
And we are thrilled to have, for the first time on our show, Monsignor Charles Pope, who is a priest of the Diocese of Washington, D.C. He is known to EWTN listeners and viewers and Catholics around the world for his commentaries and his homilies. And the most interesting thing about Monsignor Pope is that he was born in Chicago, where I was born. So that already elevates you, Monsignor, to a level above many other guests. But thank you for making the time for us today.
Happy to do it. And I guess, yeah, I'm on EWTN radio by way of GRN network. I got that show, The Quest. So I'm out there.
Right. And it's so funny how people can
me.
just kind of happen upon you in so many different venues. Yeah. Well, you're with us today because you've got a new book out, which is making big waves. And the non-provocative title of it is The Hell There Is, an exploration of the often rejected doctrine of the Church. So tell us what I was going to say, what possessed you to write this book. That's probably not the thing I want to say. What inspired you, Monsignor, to write this book on hell?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, I've come to find that this is the most widespread, I'm going to say heresy, not in maybe the formal sense. I think most people reject not hell in toto, but they pretty much relegate it, though, to the realm of the extremely unlikely, not really relevant aspect of spiritual life. And that's just not what Jesus did. So I want to, even people who go to daily mass are just kind of dismissive. Oh, God's not going to do that, And so I wanted to make sure that we don't just in our own vision just dismiss something that Jesus taught quite vigorously and frequently and had different views than most of us moderns do. So we'll get back to that in a moment. But the second reason I wrote it is that on account of the dismissal of hell as a very likely outcome for the vast majority of people, there's almost no urgency in the church today. What are we, 17% of Catholics even bother going to mass anymore? There isn't any sense that, who needs sacraments? Who needs to go to church? Who needs to pray or live a good moral life? Basically, I'm a nice person, I can, and so on. There's a kind of a blandness that's come upon, even some of the most devout of Catholics. Thanks be to God, those who still go to mass, but the vast majority don't even bother. And again, if there's nothing to be saved from, or there's no present danger that I might need to run to the Lord and take him seriously and receive the sacraments like medicine, and then, why bother with it all? So I think hell is something that we have to recover in a healthy way so
Right.
that we can be more urgent about our faith. And the final maybe flip side of that coin is also more joyful.
Hmm.
To go before a crucifix and say, wow, you did that for me. You saved me. And I'm so happy, Lord. I mean,
Right. A sense of
I could have,
gratitude, right?
yeah, I could have slid into hell. And yet you're grabbing me by the hand. And I thank you. Help me never to let go, Lord. But there's a joy that's also missing in the church today. There aren't any
Right.
sermons on heaven either.
You
I
know,
mean,
Monsignor, I was at a funeral, yes, last week rather,
yeah.
and I mentioned to a member of the family, a close member of the family as I was leaving, that I would arrange to have a month's mind mass said and a mass said on the deceased person's birthday. And, not in a way that they were making fun of it or anything. They were just completely puzzled and,
Yeah.
and sort of
Right.
shocked and said, why would you need to do that?
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, so part of this too is just a lack of general catechesis, is it not?
It is general lack of democratic keys, also the rejection of purgatory. That's a whole nother book I could write there. But I would say that I think that what we want to do is, once again, recover these things in a healthy way. And most people reject the doctrine of hell today, I think, on a false premise that what it means is that there's some mean, angry God trying to keep people out of heaven, and he's mean, he's angry, and he's going to just throw people into eternal hellfire. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that. That's not why there's a hell. Hell does not exist for that reason. Hell exists because God, who is love, has a deep reverence for our freedom, and he really needs and wants our yes. And without it, he won't force us. And there's a lot of people that are not really interested in what God is offering. And I can talk about that later if you want to develop it. But it's not true that just everybody really wants to go to heaven and God wants to save them. So it's all nice and fun. People are, it's not about God at all. It's about what we are freely choosing and not choosing and how that accumulates in our life. So those would be the things I want to do to recast the conversation.
Monsignor, in your book, you tell a story of a woman who approaches you after a homily. You broach the topic of hell, and she said, "That's not the Jesus I know." And you write that for many, quote, "The Father has become a doting grandfather, and Jesus has become a harmless hippie." And it's true. You see these images of Jesus, and it's almost weaponized. But culturally, how did we get here to the point that Jesus is a harmless hippie and, we're recasting God as the God that we know, which is the God that, we think we'd like to know.
Yeah, there are some both theological and sociological answers to your question. Now, you asked more really the cultural or sociological question, but I would just say, in terms of theology, modernism has pretty much kind of come in and largely dismissed lots of aspects that don't appeal to the modern world. So let's get back then to the modern world. See, I think the issue for a lot of people today is that in our culture, we have tended to reduce love to mere kindness. And so, again, kindness is certainly an aspect of love, but so is correction, so is rebuke, so is punishment. I mean, there are all kinds of aspects of love that are sort of set aside today. And that's why you get this stuff in the culture that's, if you don't agree with the agenda of this or that group, you hate us. You're racist or you're homophobic or you're full of hate. Well, wait a minute. How did we get to this all or nothing? Because we've reduced love to mere kindness or mere tolerance rather than to really want what's best for the other. And that's also then affected our notion of God because God is love. God doesn't care about other stuff, man. And so that's Jesus, the harmless hippie, token on a number and saying, hey, man, don't worry about all those rules, dude. Let's go out and serve the poor and all is well. And
Hmm.
so it's a kind of a watered down gospel. Jesus calls us to profound discipleship and holiness. And he doesn't do that just to make life hard. It's just the opposite. He wants to free us. And we're a hard case. We're in real trouble. And he has to do a lot of work to get our hearts right. And so he's urgent about this and warns quite a bit about hell. in his. I have a whole chapter on all the things he said.
Well, Monsignor, there's also sort of a parallel danger, isn't there, with, first of all, on the one extreme, not believing that hell exists, or if it does, very, very few people, except if you're Pol Pot or Hitler, only they go there, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other end, people who are so afraid of the Lord that they can't accept his mercy and his compassion.
Hmm.
And, as we would say in the civil law, mitigating factors in our lives, right? That the Lord
Right.
who created us knows, if, for example, we were raised in an abusive home and really weren't taught how to worship him properly, etc. How do you find it's the best way to address those two particular polar ends, if you will?
Well, I think my book is best designed for those at the other end of the spectrum, except for Hitler and so on. So I would say my book itself probably speaks to that. In terms of scrupulosity, this, of course, most of us have been scrupulous at some point in our life about something. But clinical scrupulosity is a whole thing all by itself. It's so. But let's just sort of address more of a mild scrupulosity. Where aren't you going to incite more fear and so on? Well, again, I guess two answers to that. First of all, Jesus didn't seem to worry about that. Now, I mean, we're not called to a servile fear. The real call is to a filial fear where we love God so much that we don't want to offend him. That's what we call filial fear. But if servile fear of punishment is all you got, go with it. But on the other hand, talk to someone and work your way through it. But here's the deal. I want to just say for anybody who might feel this concern that even the smallest sins might send them to hell. No, God is a just God. He loves you, he wants to save you. And so the point is, I think that if we're trying, and he gives us a way out. He says, follow me. And so there, he basically says, look, take the sacraments I offer you, read and study my word, keep holy fellowship and pray. And you're largely going to be moving in the right direction. No, I think that therefore it's not as though, we all got to sit here in fear and wonder when am I going to go to hell for having a dirty thought. Well, not if you're regular, I think, with the sacraments and so on. And likewise, if you're trying your best to live a good holy life. But here's the deal, and this is why I think it still remains that a lot of people end up going to hell, because it's not because God is, looking at every little tiny detail and not taking anything else into account. But it's just that not everybody wants to go to heaven, and God respects our freedom. And we say, but Father, everybody wants to go to heaven. Not necessarily. Let me explain. Heaven isn't just a designer paradise that I make up. It'll be for me a golf course or something like that. It is what it is. It is the kingdom of God with all of its values and all of its qualities. Now, there's a lot of things in the kingdom of God that people today, many people, even basically nice people, put it in quotes, don't want anything to do with. For example, chastity, or for example, love of one's enemy, or forgiveness, or generosity to the poor, and rather than maybe greed, or more often than not in the book of Revelation, liturgy, heaven is described as a great liturgy, and people say, church is boring, I don't want to go there. And so again, a lot of theoretically nice people are saying there's a lot of aspects of the kingdom of heaven that I'm not interested in. Chastity, please. In fact, there's a lot of defiance today about that. How dare you tell me what to do? There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. Get your rosaries off my ovaries, go away. That kind of thinking. And we've also got a lot of people today that forgiveness and love of one's enemy is, oh my gosh, I want to kill my enemy. In fact, our whole entertainment culture in the movies are largely based on vengeance movies. Our hero comes, and after 90 minutes of breaking things and blowing up stuff, he has the final showdown, kills the bad guy, and off he goes, girl in arm, burning city in the background, roll credits. And I mean, that's not the gospel. But we just go for these things, and then when we hear about things like, loving your enemy, forgiving, chastity, people are like, I'm not interested in that. Well, okay, now here's the deal. You don't have to be interested in it, but you're not going to want heaven, because heaven is about things like that. It isn't just about what you want it to be. So what I'm trying to show here is that it's not on God. It's on what we do. Now, one final thing, and I'll throw it back to you. Jesus puts it this way in John chapter 3. He says, here's the nature of the judgment, that the light has come into the world, but many prefer the darkness. That's it. Oh my gosh, they prefer it. And there are a lot of people today who are not bad, evil people. They're not Hitler, but they don't really, are not all that interested in what God is really offering. And so that's what we want to do. Lord, change my heart. Get me on board with what you're really offering.
Monsignor, on the topic of invincible indifference, ignorance, I mean, there's obviously the clear-cut cases of a woman in Saudi Arabia who's never had any exposure to the gospel and, just tries to live a good life. But I struggle with our
Mhm.
culture where,
Yeah.
as you say, people, they are, I guess, exposed to the truth, but the cultural forces are so
Mhm.
strong, and you have children who are raised from the beginning, not just with no exposure, but actually with like outright
Mhm.
bigoted ideologies.
Yeah.
How do we
Mhm.
grapple with this and
Yeah.
and the topic of hell?
I deal with that a little bit in the book, about invincible ignorance and so on. I think the danger, though, with invincible ignorance is not that it doesn't exist, it does. And God will certainly take things like that into account. But that we tend to turn invincible ignorance into a carte blanche, it's like of just, complete, no matter what, therefore they're just going to just come right into heaven because they didn't know any better. Well, there's a lot of things that people do know better about, even if they're not instructed in the gospel, something called the natural law and so on. And so God will judge them based on what they could have reasonably known. And so I think that's the direct answer to that question. Now, I think, though, that if you go to the Lumen Gentium, chapter 16, and by the way, Dr. Ralph Martin had a very good book on, he is mainly, this is his thesis on Lumen Gentium 16. Will Many Be Saved is the title of the book, and it's a magnificent treatment of this. But it does say in Lumen Gentium 16, the document on the church, Second Vatican Council, that those who, can't reasonably know, God will certainly, we also regard them who are in other religious traditions as somehow on their way to the fullness of the truth. So there's a lot of sort of openness to accepting that people are on a journey. Okay. But it does say at the very end, and most people leave the last verse off, however, on account of our tendency to call good evil and evil good, and on account of the darkness of our mind, our intellect, and our will, the weakness of our will, many, many have decided firmly against God and his kingdom, even in these traditions. And so, again, what we ought to do is say, look, we have to leave the details of the judgment up to God. But we have got to get better about being explicitly bringing people to Jesus Christ. Because Lumen Gentium says, okay, technically they can make it possibly without Christ, but it's not as likely as we think. And they have the same forces of sin that anybody else does, but without the grace of baptism and the other helps that God gives us, the sacraments. And that's a terrible place to be. And we have every obligation to once again rekindle missionary activity and not just say, oh, well, they're all in. God will just take all that into account. And I'm not saying you're saying that, Ashley, but I'm just saying that's the thinking that I think infects most people. Well, maybe one final thought on this, and I'll toss it back, which is Pope Paul VI said, many people ask, are those who didn't know Jesus, can they be saved? He says, I think this is the wrong question. The question is, can we be saved for having failed to preach him to them?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so the church in Lumen Gentium 16 concludes by saying, we've got to redouble our missionary efforts. Yes, they can possibly get there, but it's not as likely as we think. And we've got to work hard for the salvation of souls, but we don't anymore. We're all
Well,
like,
that's
it's all in the bag, and that's why I wanted to bring this back again to rekindle in urgency. It's not all in the bag.
Well, Monsignor, we're entering into Passiontide now, the final weeks leading up to Easter and to Holy Week. And one of the great devotions that has sprung up, thanks to St. John Paul II, is that to the Divine Mercy and the revelations given to St. Faustina. And she, on the one hand, had very explicit visions of hell.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the Lord made it clear to her that no matter how scarlet the sin, I think is what the phrase that he used, I can wipe it away with my mercy, and that
Mhm.
every soul is given three opportunities before entering into eternal judgment to accept the Lord or to reject him. So
Yeah.
I feel like that poses yet another contradiction. Do you see it as such, or am I maybe just
No,
misreading it?
I don't see it as a contradiction. Actually, like I said, nobody spoke or, had a more powerful vision of hell than she did. But I can say that that's why we need mercy. See, unfortunately, I think a lot of people think, and again, this is not you, Mary. I'm just saying this is kind of in the air out there. People think that mercy means, hey, man, God is like way cool with what I'm doing. Well, if that's the case, you don't need mercy. That's a logical fallacy. God is not way cool. And we won't be able to tolerate his presence. I can get to that in a moment. But the point is that he wants to show us mercy, but the key is repentance. Where I say, I'm wrong. I've done something and I need to turn to God. I can't save myself. And God will pour out his mercy. I'm not so worried about people who are struggling with sins and they have to come to confession frequently. And it's me again, Father. It's the same old, same old. And I'm like, okay. But at the end of the day, I'm not as worried about them. I'm worried about the number of people today who are just defiant. I will not be told what to do. There's nothing wrong with my lifestyle or what I'm doing. No, I'm going to celebrate it with parades. There's a lot of people out there today who are celebrating greed and vengeance and hatred and sexual error and all kinds of stuff. And I mean, there's no sign. They think mercy means God is cool with this. No, no. Call on him. He's not. And so this is where I think we lose. One of the chief errors of our day is the constant preaching of mercy without any reference to repentance. And that's what she's getting at. She's not saying everything's fine, don't worry. She's saying, no, it's not fine. There is a hell and people go there. She saw them and she says, don't go there. And here's the way. Call on his mercy. Repent. See? Admit you need it.
Right. So humility has to come along with that, admitting that you've done something.
Yeah.
And being able to say to the Lord, even at the very end, I really screwed up. Please, forgive me. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to add, there's something in the diary also that Faustina. There's a passage that always strikes me as amazing. The Lord says to her, Faustina, if you were ever to see the true horror that you are, you would die of fright. Like, he's talking to a sister in a cloister.
Right.
Man, I must really be deformed. But I think we sometimes forget how awesomely holy and glorious God is, and that we're so disfigured and deformed that we can't possibly endure his presence unless he goes to work and prepares us. He has to kind of bring us up to the temperature of glory. So that we can endure the blazing heat of his love, and likewise accustom us to the brightness of his truth, so that we can endure the bright light of heaven. Otherwise, we'll be horrified and slink back at it, wailing and grinding of teeth, as Jesus puts it. I have a chapter in the book on the wrath of God. It does not mean God is mad. That's not what it means. But it is what I was just talking about. We can't just walk into God's presence in our current state and think we can endure. Who can endure the day of God's coming? Who will stand when he appears? Only those who he has made ready. And that's the work of mercy.
Yeah, similar to what Our Lady said to the children at Fatima. Remember, there was one of their playmates who had died. Yeah. And Our Lady says to them, they ask about her, and she said she'll be in purgatory until the end of time. And you're thinking she was an adolescent in a small town in Portugal. So what could she possibly have done?
This is the question that I wanted to ask, which is personal to me because I have 5 young children, and they... they're well catechized, they go to excellent schools, they're receiving excellent formation. And I'm noticing that the older ones are starting to worry about people in their life, friends, family that they love, that they see as what you would say, a range of defiant, not baptized. How would you answer the questions of children about, these people? I've been asked point blank, is that person going to hell? Obviously, the easy deflection is that's for God to say. But there's got to be something more consoling, but also not overly, I don't know, whitewashing it. Or
Let me address the question first at another level and see if you can tell me if this will help answer your direct question. One of the things that almost never happens today is that someone will go to someone else and talk like this. Like, let's say a parent talking to an adult child. Dear, I'm really worried about you. You're living outside of marriage with your boyfriend or girlfriend. I'm concerned, and you're not going to church, and I'm just very deeply concerned that you might go to hell. The scriptures say that fornicators will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. That's obviously unrepented. And so, but we never talk like that anymore. When was the last time a clergyman ever said that certain sins can exclude one from the kingdom of heaven? Now, I preach like that way a lot, but that's I'm not trying to sound my horn, but I'm just saying that most of my brothers never mention this. Or even how many times we've heard about these politicians who support abortion. Why don't bishops go and tell them to stop receiving communion? I want to go deeper and say, why don't bishops or their own pastors go to them and say, I'm concerned you might go to hell for this. See, I worry about you. Now, none of us can be the judge, but I think we do need to recover a little bit of this and to say there are just things that Scripture says, and I have them in the book, that there's a lot of ordinary behaviors that we sort of tolerate today, which we didn't used to. I'm not that old. I'm in my mid 60s. But I remember a time when people didn't tolerate easily people living together outside of marriage or getting quick divorces or any of those things. And now they're just rampant and we just settle down with them. Listen, these things, God says in his own word, can so deform your heart that you won't want the heaven I'm offering. So I think somewhere we have to start there, recovering this understanding that some things left to themselves, if they were not repented, can lead to hell. Now, getting back to your question, I think, what about a parent who's maybe anxious about that? Well, I think that's not bad. That's not a bad answer to be anxious about it. Don't run around in a panic, but develop a sense of urgency. I really need to pray for this kid of mine. I really need to fast. If they won't listen to me, I need to pray. Maybe God will send someone they will listen to. But we're very settled down today with kind of sin and a kind of an ordinariness that I think we should have some anxiety about, not panic. I would simply say again that I think somewhere in there's grace to be found, even in a painful kind of situation.
Well, Monsignor, what would you say to Catholics now as we prepare to enter into the Triduum and the three holiest days of the year? Someone who might be listening to this saying to themselves, wow, it's been a long time since I've been to confession. Or, I have children who are all married outside of the church and haven't been to Mass in years. How would you counsel people who, perhaps through no direct fault of their own, are really off track? How do we get back on? And how do we stay there?
St. Paul says it so beautifully on the Ash Wednesday reading, doesn't it? He says, we are like ambassadors for Christ, crying out, be reconciled to God. And so I think that all the time, I'm often mentioning, we have confessions in my parish all the time. Clergy have to get better about offering it easily. I always have it before every Sunday Mass, every weekend Mass, and also other times during the week. But the point is that we have to start there, but we also have to, again, I always say to my people, some of you are holier than I am. I go to confession like once a week, and some of you don't have to seem to go at all. How are you so holy? Tell me how. I play with them a little or use a little humor. Or sometimes I say, a Lent celebrated without confession is kind of a disgrace.
Right.
You get people laughing a little, but I hope it also gets through to them that this is something serious to be about. We all need to go to the Lord and say, Lord, my biggest sin is I don't know half my sins or that I make light of them. But Lord, I come to you. I'm humbling myself and I love you. I want to be saved. I don't know what all that means. I'm not even sure how to stop doing some of this stuff. But Lord, I'm not going to call good or no big deal what you call sin. Right. I'll come to you. I'll confess it. And I'm going to try to get on this straight and narrow path again.
But I think you raise a very good point, Monsignor, about priests needing to make it more available. If you build it, they will come. I had a priest friend who just at his parish, as an experiment of sorts, offered 10 straight hours of confession and got a bunch of his classmates. They heard 225 confessions in 10 hours. So there's a hunger for it, but if it's not available, people can't, avail themselves of it. So
absolutely.
Well, Monsignor, thank you so much for joining us, and we have really enjoyed this conversation. Listeners, to learn more about Monsignor Charles Pope and his new book, please visit TAN Books at tanbooks.com. And to learn more about us at the Catholic Association, And to learn more about us at the Catholic Association, please go to thecatholicAssociation.org to follow everything we do in radio, TV, and print, online, and in our local communities. Thank you for joining us today.
And we'd like to thank all of our guests and listeners for joining us today. Make sure to follow us on social media, and as always, you go with our prayers.